elementary educators, as we previously discussed, reflecting on our own identities and devoting time to our own identity development and evolution is highly crucial as educators and just as people. Therefore, we must support our students' identity development as well by providing them opportunities and support to do so. And one of the biggest arguments you'll hear about why LGBTQ plus topics should not be taught to elementary students is because it's not age appropriate. And in fact, that's completely false. There have been several studies, including one done by Montclair State University in 2020, that have shown that children as early as preschool age can both comprehend and discuss gender and sexual identity. They have the capacity to do so. So as educators, it should be our job to find ways to support those conversations and that exploration at an age where they're already starting to recognize it and think about it for themselves and for others. And that simply looks like supporting our students inside and outside the classroom while affirming their rights to define their identities for themselves and to continue to explore their identities in a safe, brave space that hopefully we can provide. And again, the best thing we can do to support our students is to continue to educate ourselves, as you're doing now, and explore our own identities alongside our students. That really creates an affinity and a level of advocacy as well. So when it comes to creating and implementing LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum, which we will help you with later on in this presentation, don't you worry, there are a few things to consider. So for our curricula, we should really be integrating LGBTQ plus issues, including identity development, in our daily lesson plans throughout the semester and school year instead of devoting just one class period or one unit of study to it. And that way we can normalize this content and make it a part of regular daily conversations, which is really important. And in addition, when we're selecting children's books to read or videos to show or other resources that we might share with our students, choose sources by queer and trans people. And again, schedule in time and space for open discussion and for identity reflection. And then outside of the curriculum, we want to also ensure that we have classroom policies that reflect inclusivity. And it's great to actually have some sort of display for these policies too, whether it's a poster or a sign or the new progress flag. You can see some examples on this slide here. And by the way, there are so many places online that sell things just like this that you can buy. So you have so many options. So go check that out in some of your free time. That might be something you could easily add to your classroom. Or even if you create a list of classroom policies that you can help write with your class, that would be extremely valuable too. So for example, to get them involved in the process, you could have each student all decorate it, for example, or they could all help actually write out the policies. Like they could actually use their handwriting to write it out if they can. Or another great thing to do is just have them all sign their name on it at some point too. And those are really great ways to get students involved in the process, and they'll probably be more likely to be excited about it if they're involved in that process. So to continue on with that topic, as you can see on this slide here, we've provided just some basic do's and don'ts when creating these policies with your students. So some things you should do are focusing on LGBTQ plus students and other community members' right to feel safe at school, and explaining how these policies will positively impact all students of all identities. And that's the language and the reasoning you can use when introducing this collaboration behind creating these policies and why they're important, and helping your students understand that and using that language, like I said. And as we open up these conversations, we can reinforce that as members of a school community, we have an obligation and a responsibility to treat all other community members with respect, regardless of our opinions on them or what their identities are. And lastly, we can reinforce the practice of using gender-neutral, inclusive language by using that type of language in our actual policies that we write up, but also teaching and correcting students on how to use it, again, throughout the school year, and modeling ourselves how to use it, not just when we're making these policies or learning about LGBTQ plus folks, but all the time. So for example, when we're standing with our class, instead of saying boys and girls, we can just say students. Or we can refer to other people using they, them pronouns if we don't know their pronouns. So if we're reading a book about someone in history, for example, using they, them pronouns if we're not sure what their actual pronouns are. That is a really great way to model gender neutral and inclusive language with your students. And then in terms of the don'ts, try not using terms like political correctness or liberalism when explaining new policies, because it really shouldn't be about that. It really should just be about the inclusion of all people with all identities and making sure that they feel safe and that we create a safe space for everyone involved. So we don't really want to bring that into the conversation. And then again, kind of what we've said a few different times, but do not assume that a child does not identify as LGBTQ+. So when you're making these policies, we don't want to just think about the students that we think identify as some form of LGBTQ+. We want to keep in mind all students, and we don't want to make assumptions about any of our students or our coworkers. We just want to be able to have people express themselves in the way they want to. So from there, we wanted to lead a discussion, and we led those in our workshops. And here are some questions that you can consider. And again, if you have some time, please reflect on them, journal on them. Would love to have you set some time aside to actually reflect on some of these classroom policies and building it with your students. So one guiding question, again, you can kind of take this wherever you want, but one guiding question would be, how might you create a supportive environment for everyone to explore their identities? So in this section, we gave you several ideas, but maybe you have some also that really apply to your classroom or your particular set of students that we haven't mentioned, and that would be great. We'd love to have you brainstorm that and think about how we can not only create a supportive environment for all identities, but for people to explore those identities too, within themselves or others. And then secondly, what ways might we incorporate sexual identity / gender norms unnecessarily into our classroom policies or procedures, and what are possible alternatives? So I just kind of gave an example there of saying boys and girls, for example, or ladies and gentlemen versus just students, or hi friends, or something like that. So that's an example, but I'd love for you to, again, just take some time to explore what other things you might be doing that you might not even be aware of, that might be perpetuating those norms that we don't need to perpetuate. So, as instructed by Doug here, we would normally take a break here, but we're going to skip that since we're on the video. And again, our check-in would have been, do you have any questions so far? Do you have any comments so far? Do you have any jokes? So again, take a few minutes just to take a break from the material, and feel free to check out that check-in when you get a second.